So it's now 1:30. I think people are going to still trickle in as we get started. For anybody that has just joined, feel free to utilize the chat function on the right-hand side to introduce yourself, leave a comment, leave a question. We are going to be taking a couple questions at the end of the session. But so yeah, feel free to engage there along the way. So right now we'll just go ahead and kick things off with a quick intro. My name is Ranjit Raju. I run the West Coast over here at Knotch. And with us today, we have Alison Wagonfield, the CMO at Google Cloud. Alison obviously has an incredibly impressive background, expert in her field. She previously was the operating partner at Emergence Capital, Silicon Valley venture capital firm, where she helped work on over the firm's branding, marketing, and talent programs. And before that, she was at Emergence and also the executive director at the Harvard Business School California Research Center. In addition, prior to HBS, she's led marketing and business development at Greenlight, and she also worked at Intuit, where she co-founded the Quicken Loans business. I could go on and on. I mean, Alison, it is truly a pleasure to have you join Pros and Content today and to be speaking with you. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here. It looks like a great conference, and hope I can share some of what we're all experiencing together as marketers. And certainly if anybody has questions, please add them into the chat along the way so that we can be sure to address what's top of mind for everybody that's listening in.
Yeah. And speaking of which, I mean, one of the big topics that's top of mind right now is events, or really taking a lot of these live events and bringing them into the virtual space, as many of us have to do right now in the marketing and the communications field. I know myself, I mean, I was at an event in Scottsdale when the stay-at-home orders and travel restrictions came in. So as someone who traveled probably 50 to 75% of the time to these various events, it's been a definite, significant change in the day-to-day life. And so hopefully with some of this discussion today, I mean, again, with Google and Google Cloud in particular being really an expert in the field when it comes to live events and kind of out-of-home presence. I don't think there's a single airport I've been to where I haven't seen Google Cloud represented. Hopefully we can provide some additional value there to the attendees. Cool. So go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say it feels kind of meta to be talking about digital events from a digital event. So put that on the table right now, but keep it interesting.
It's the new world order for sure. So we're all having to learn, of course, new platforms, new experiences, and relearning really how to engage with people in this context. So, well, look, I want to start kind of at the beginning. A long time ago to March. March of 2020, ages in the past. Just as the announcements were starting to come in or the news was coming into the US about the pandemic, about the spread, as companies were starting to make those shifts, take us back to, where your team was, where you were at the time, and really how you tackled those challenges right off the bat.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So this was the first weekend of March. So actually, let me give you context. So our biggest event of the year is Google Cloud Next, and that was scheduled for the first week of April in 2020. So you can imagine, all of you who work in B2B marketing or user conferences, by the beginning of March, we were pretty deep in that planning and had already started the promotion for the event. We had a lot of registered speakers. We were working on the keynotes, everything. And I remember it was, I think, a Friday right before the first weekend of March. I was driving into work and I heard a New York Times podcast from The Daily talking about the pandemic. And what I heard on that is there was one stat that emerged, and it was something like, for every 300 people you know, somebody is going to be deeply impacted by COVID-19. And this was like the end of February, the beginning of March. And I remember getting into work that day and thinking, how's this really going to work for us to be able to turn Google Cloud Next to do a physical event? And we made a pretty quick call, and this was that first weekend of March, to move the event digital. And so we thought at that time that we had our kind of plan A was that we would move it digital and we would do all the recordings in offices, but we wouldn't, or studios, but we wouldn't bring everybody into Moscone in San Francisco. And this is, by the way, before they had like barred public gatherings. So that was our first pivot. And we spent that weekend communicating with everyone, saying that we're going to record everything and we're still going to run it. And we're going to run it those first couple of days of April. And then we realized effectively 2 weeks after that, in the middle of March, that we couldn't even go into our offices anymore. There was a complete shutdown. There was no way we were going to be able to record. And everybody was so distracted with doing what's right for themselves, for safety, for their families, for their businesses, that it was just the wrong time to have this event the first week of April. So then we made an announcement that we were going to postpone, but we postponed indefinitely at that point. And then we decided another couple of weeks later that we would reimagine the entire event and go from a 3-day concentrated event into a 9-week digital series. And so that is what we're working on right now, that's scheduled to start shortly, July 14th, running all the way through September. But that was such a major kind of shift in time. We went from plan A to plan B to plan C on every dimension. Really, probably we're at like probably plan G right now. And the agility has been extreme. Fortunately, we have a great team that thinks from an agile standpoint. That's always been the hiring criteria at Google. And the team has had a mindset of, let's start with what's right for the customers and for our attendees and for our users. How would they want to learn and engage right now? What's safe and practical and useful and valuable? If we always start there and work back from there, then we will be able to make the right decisions as an organization, and then bring as much creativity in what we have to bear to bring it all to life.
And then what were the initial challenges you faced? I mean, when you're thinking about taking an event of that size, virtual context, yeah, what were the first things you thought about, or maybe things that came up unexpectedly along the way?
Yeah, so the challenges were on every dimension. So last year we had 30,000 people in person in Moscone, to just give a context. And it's not just a user event, but we also have an executive element called Leader Circle. We have a partner summit that's involved. We have an analyst summit. So there's all these additional events. So first of all, I was thinking through all of those different elements. Second, in the past, we've had these 90-minute keynotes, but nobody can sit through a 90-minute keynote virtually right now. And then we had to figure out, like, well, what's the length of time that people can basically sit through anything and stay engaged, and found that it's really kind of the TED Talk length, 20 minutes. I mean, that's what the session is going to be right now. And maybe for the opening keynote with Thomas Kurian, our CEO, we could stretch that to 30 minutes because we'll be packing a bunch in that. But thinking in terms of 20-minute sessions. So we had to reimagine that. We also had to, we're not using studios at all. Almost everything is home capture. So how do you set everybody up to be able to capture? Then we were thinking through what makes Next so great is all of the Google Cloud Next, the event, is all the one-on-one engagement and the engagement with Googlers, customers, engineers, right, partners. So how do we create these engagement mechanisms? So we put in place Ask an Expert sessions. And then we put in place what we call a Dory, which is an internal way where you can vote up and down questions. And so that we can have people asking questions, get them answered real time. So we were trying to think through all of the interactivity elements of it that make an event so great, as well as the learning components, as well as the inspiration pieces to it, figuring out what's live versus what's on demand versus what's pre-recorded. So there's so many different elements and all of the creative elements, but all, of course, this entire event has been planned working from home. We made the decision to make it free, which was in the past, there's paid tickets and over $1,000 to attend. And so we just weren't quite sure about what value we were going to be able to deliver across the board and didn't want to create any barriers for engagement. So we made that decision. Then there was, you can imagine we had a lot of fixed costs that were already in place with an event that was just a couple weeks away. So we spent a lot of time negotiating, seeing what we could repurpose, reuse from fixed costs. So that's been an ongoing challenge and opportunity that we're still working through some of those costs. I'm sure many of you on here had some deposits down in places and things like that that are complicated to work through. So a lot of different dimensions. And we had sponsorships. We had paid partner sponsors that we had to think through what kind of partner experience we could provide and how do we make that valuable and worthwhile, and still working through all of those elements as well. But I think that we've come up with good solutions. But we have dozens of work streams, as you can imagine, really strong events team driving this, and all of the rest of our organization and our regional teams and our partner teams and our product teams all involved.
And then you mentioned value as far as showing value to some of your sponsors. I'm also curious from a value standpoint for Google itself. How does that shift between, again, a live event versus a virtual event? Like, what are the pros and cons that you have to consider as you think about not only delivering value to attendees, but also the value that Google or sponsors or others are getting from an event like that, if you can't have that in-person component?
Yeah. So I think about value in a couple of ways. One is certainly the educational value for people tuning in. Are they learning? Are they hearing from customers that are doing the kind of work that they would want to be doing? Are they learning from our engineers directly, the how-to elements? So we were thinking about it from the audience value. From a Google and partner value, are we continuing to generate leads? Are we building pipeline? And one of the reasons you do events is to educate, but also to understand, have people raise their hand and say, I'm interested. Are we ensuring that the right Google teams, when if somebody raises their hand and says, I want to learn more about Anthos, which is one of a great solution we have, can we ensure that the right sales engineer is talking to that customer or the right partner? So doing a lot of the connectivity there. And we're just constantly making sure that everything that we're doing has the right value and the right engagement elements to it. And I'm sure we won't get it right every step of the way. I mean, we have 250 sessions to just give you a sense of the scope of what we're going to have over the course of 9 weeks. And I see that one of my colleagues is on here right now who's answering questions, Mark Ferrone, who's doing great work running all of our programming in the chat. So thank you, Mark, for tag teaming with me, answering questions on the chat right now, but he's been with us every step of the way on this.
And then, I'm sure that kind of is a good segue into that you have to consider with an event like this. You talked about 250 sessions. Some of the platforms that we have out there today. I won't speak to Hopin specifically. They've been a great partner for us, but a lot of these platforms today can't handle some of the capacity or have a lot of technical nuance to them. So maybe talk a little bit about that from a platform perspective, but beyond that, what are some of the other technical aspects that you have to consider?
Yeah, so we've been spending a lot of time on that. Unfortunately, we started investing in technology platforms years ago for digital events. This isn't the first digital event we've done by any measure. We do lots of webinars and programs. It's just at a broader scale. And last year we did a pretty big investment in what we called our Next On Air platform, which is actually what we're using this year as the foundation. So the good news is that we had done some of that work ahead of time, because I think it would have been difficult to pivot this quickly if we didn't have some of those building blocks in place. So we've been enhancing that platform and then complementing it with other platforms that we have, for example, Google Meet, which is our video conferencing product that we've now extended to everyone, everywhere, and really invested in over the last couple of months, that we'll be using for one-on-one sessions and roundtables. And then we have some other home-built products that we use in more of a webinar format. And then this Dory product, which is our Q&A element, we have that built in alongside. So, and of course, we have YouTube to do any kind of really broad live streaming elements. So we're fortunate at Google that we have technology at our disposal, but at the same time, we're stitching a lot of things together. And so for the last week or two, we've done a lot of testing and just ensuring that, like, let's pressure test, because it's hard to know how many people at any point in time, what's that login, what's the registration system, because we are going to have people log in addition to being able to watch live streams. And we're pressure testing all of it right now. It's gearing up for July 14th. And a lot of the pieces we've been doing, as I'm sure all of you have been, dozens and dozens of digital events globally for the last, we had done it historically, but the last quarter in particular. So we've been working through a lot of these elements of it, just not at this broader scale.
Got it. That's interesting. And I mean, I think there's an obvious answer there, also a technology resource question to Google that you all obviously answer it with a lot of the best resources out there. So I'm curious about, it's as far as what are the capabilities that you think can help some of those technologies, some of those capabilities that you think can help a lot of the marketers, the communications teams, the events teams that are attending this session. What are some of those that you're most excited about, or some of those that you think would be most helpful during, in the current landscape?
Yeah, I think that the biggest kind of challenges and opportunities are trying to figure out how to recreate engagement, and both in real time. And so there's a chat going on here, but after the fact, because often what happens in events is you have a session and then it's the hallway conversation after the session, or the follow-up, or you go try to find the speaker afterwards, or you take a note, or you go find the show floor and go dig in on something and you ask an expert there. And that's been what we've been trying to think through, is how do you create that, what we're calling the surround sound, to the different elements. And I don't think that we've cracked it. I think we're working on it. And my sense is that even it's a 9-week event for us, or Cloud Next, is that we'll get better each week on some of those aspects and elements. And curious from others, I can add into the chat if you've seen this work really well, but that's been, because that's the piece that's so exciting. That's why you go to physical events, is to, to learn and immerse yourself in a community of people that want to learn along the same way.
Yeah. And are there specific, for those that are listening in, are there some specific resources that you would point people to, or I'd say advice, having done this many times before now and have experience with these virtual events, what do you think are the landmines to avoid, but also the aspects to double down on and encourage?
Yeah, so what we've been thinking about in a couple of different ways is, one of how do we create a curated experience for thousands, tens of thousands of people that we're expecting. And so we've created this concept of playlists, so that you can self-select what type of thing you want to learn, so that you could have a playlist along those lines. And once we know what's part of your playlist, then maybe we can supplement with other materials you might be interested in. Would you want to know this? Would you like to do a free trial on that particular product? If somebody does a playlist on a whole bunch of analytics products, we know what they're interested in, and then we can provide more value add, or maybe introduce them to a couple of partners that are really experienced in analytics. So we're trying to get signals, and that's part of why you encourage registration, of course, as opposed to just kind of taking away all gated elements, because then you don't we're basically trading off the value that if you register and provide a playlist to show what you're interested in, we will give you that additional value from us and our engineers and our executives and our partners to make it worth your while. That's the kind of like implicit kind of agreement in a sense. And we're just trying to be able to highlight those aspects of it.
In a way, are you talking really about personalization, kind of personalization of that virtual experience?
We would love to do that. I mean, of course, that would be the ideal. And I don't know if we'll be able to kind of get to all of that in our first year of really doing this at scale, but we're certainly trying as much as we can. And honestly, if we had decided a year ago that we were going to make Next a fully virtual experience, it would be different than deciding in March to basically make this all happen in just a quarter, in a couple of months, while everybody's working from home. None of us have seen, we have this dedicated team. I don't think Matt Kaufman's on there, but run by Matt, one of my colleagues. And none of us have seen each other in person for 3 months. And so everything is happening over Google Meet to plan for all of this at scale.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah. And just for the record, I've loved the Google Meet capabilities myself.
I see that.
So I think I want to recognize that we're at 1:50. Sorry, I'm looking at Pacific time. 1:50 on my end, 4:50 for the East Coasters over there. And we wanted to open up for a couple questions from the audience, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, it's great with me. And I think people have been coming in here on that, right, on the chat element, but if there's specific questions that have bubbled up.
Absolutely. So one of these, you mentioned earlier that you made your next event, you made Google Cloud Next available for free for all attendees, kind of opened it up. And that's a trend that we've seen as well with a lot of events in the space going virtual. So Diane is asking, curious about how you think about that pricing as these events go virtual. Should all of these be no charge? And really, I think by extension, does that represent, we get back to a value exchange question there? And so maybe if you could speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And we explored for a little bit of time about what we would charge for. And we didn't have confidence that in this first year of doing Next this way, that we could create the experience that, or even know what the right amount to charge would be. And part of the advantage of having Next online this year that we may not be able to have in the future is that we can have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of developers from around the world engage, where people would not have flown to San Francisco. It would have just been prohibitive. But this is a year we can do that. Hopefully, now what I would imagine next year is hopefully we're back to physical events, but there probably will always be more of a hybrid program. I think that will be the ongoing element. And this year is pretty clear to do free. My question that we've been thinking through is, in the future, as we have more hybrid experiences, what's the right pricing model for that? And how do you still get people to come to the physical part where we know that there's value of it when you also offer all of those elements of that for free? So stay tuned as we think that through.
Well, it's an interesting point you bring up, because if more people are going to be working remotely moving forward, there's theoretically going to be a lot more appetite for these types of virtual events on a larger scale in the long term. So maybe that's an interesting thing to consider. Another person we have, Laura, is asking about, I think Mark actually just jumped in, is doing a great job answering the questions as well. I wanted to, but I think it's worth repeating, asking about a lot of folks are having challenges navigating this landscape of, I'd say, vendors, platforms, agencies that are supporting these virtual events. From, you could say at a basic level that there's Zoom, WebEx, Google Meets, Hopin, even Amazon Chime to some extent. I mean, there's a lot of different platforms out there. What are some of your suggestions on what to look for, and what kind of maybe some navigating that landscape?
Yeah, so to be honest, I haven't dug in personally that much in all of these other programs. I've been a participant now in Hopin. I've been a participant certainly in some Zoom elements. There's been a couple other platforms, and there's just a little bit of a learning curve each time. So ensuring that all of the speakers and everything, you build that in the learning curve and do some kind of preview or something, so that you ensure the last thing you want to do is have your users, customers, guests, event not have a great experience. And then just ensuring that there's not firewall challenges or anything like that, which is always what makes me nervous every time you use. There's a lot of companies, Google included, that there are certain things that are blocked from our company computers, and for privacy or security reasons, and that would be really problematic.
Is there a larger, data privacy or security conversation that people should look out for? And we haven't heard any of that about Google, but other companies within the space have had those challenges. Is that something that, or I guess, how do you think people should go about addressing that?
Yeah, so from a Google standpoint, we're very strict with everyone that we work with on all kinds of security and privacy elements, and hold all of our vendors and partners to extremely high standards. It probably drives them crazy, because we do security audits on every single one of our partners. That's probably at one extreme, but we're so sensitive, particularly with anything regarding personal information or registration information, that being so careful that it's being held at the highest privacy standards. I don't know the details about all of these other platforms, but certainly everybody should be asking all those questions, and I'm sure they are, about what exactly happens to the data, who has access to it, and what can be done with personal information.
And I want to be just cognizant of time, and we're at about again 1:55 here, so maybe we could just ask one more question if that's all right, and then we can jump. And also, I'll be hanging around as well. If you have follow-up questions, feel free to chat me later on through the Hopin platform, or email me if you'd like, and just ranjit@knotch.com. But yeah, Alison, I'd love to understand in terms of where the space is going. What the future is for this. COVID-19 context and beyond. What are the future of, in the virtual event space?
So I think that hybrid events will likely be the way forward. And I am excited about that, because I think that we can all push ourselves to think about what is truly, if you're going to build a ground up a hybrid experience, what does that look like? And I'm excited to do that thinking for next year, where we're not in such a kind of adjustment mode. And, one of the trade-offs of working virtually, it's harder to do brainstorm sessions and everything like that. And I would love to just kind of be in a room for a day, really working through this. So hopefully we'll get there. And then being able to be very purposeful about what should happen and needs to happen in person, what kind of networking needs to happen in person, what kind of engagement and learning, and what could actually be best done virtually, and how do you create that experience, and how do you then blend these beyond the point in time of an event and actually have more of an ongoing engagement over a period of time that has different elements and different check-ins, so that maybe there's a point in time when you are in person, but to have some kind of monthly follow-up that doesn't require travel, because I think that is one of the changes that will happen, is people are going to be a little more careful about their travel going forward. And when we think hybrid, I don't mean for that one particular week of an event hybrid. I mean thinking annually, what does that hybrid experience look like?
Right. And then kind of how can you take an element of some of that in-person value and bring it into the home, or add a layer of convenience there while continuing that engagement. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for the time today, for answering all of these questions. It's been a terrific conversation, and I, for one, learned a lot. I hope those that are on the line did as well. But just wanted to thank you again, Alison, for joining us today, for joining Pros and Content. And yeah, we'll talk to you again soon.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. And thanks for everyone's chats and ideas. And if you have other ideas that you'd love to see us at Google do or elsewhere, please share, because we're constantly innovating and pushing ourselves to really make sure that we're delivering the most value to all of our customers and partners. All right. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Have a great evening.
Bye-bye.